this leads us to a little segment I like to call, Death broke up between Symbolic and the Sound of Perseverance, because it's kind of forgotten now, but yeah, they did. And what is really going to come to the fore at this point in time and dictate the shape of the next few years is that Chuck is not interested in playing with a band that's even associated with being a death metal band formally at this point in time. So Death is laid to rest for a while, and his long-rumoured second band is going to enter the picture at this point, which is Control Denied. In 1996, after Death basically breaks up, Chuck begins to look for band members to realise his vision that we mentioned briefly on our last episode of a progressive, melodically focused heavy metal band along the lines of stuff like Nevermore. He announces the band's name to Death fan club members, Control Denied. Initially, he grabs drummer Chris Williams, bassist Scott Clendenin, and guitarist Shannon Hamm. Williams is later replaced by Richard Christie. What kills this idea immediately is he can't find a singer. He's absolutely not going to sing himself. He can't sing clean to the standard that he wants to do. He does ask his touring partner, Warrell Dane, from the band Nevermore, to do it, but he is just committed to Nevermore and doesn't have the time and turns it down. So he's in a bit of a kind of a rut here, a bit of meeting a bit of a dead end of not being able to get this band the way off the ground he really wants to. Meanwhile, while this is happening, labels are much more interested in contacting Chuck about the idea of making more death material. And Chuck is, like a year or so into, again, coming up against a brick wall with trying to get this band together. He is torn between his desire to really commit to making Control Denied music and the painful progress with it, the fact that this is, this is his career, his livelihood, or like that. It makes continuing with Death, in the short term at least, seem more of an attractive thing. He eventually makes a deal with Nuclear Blast Records, which is a very interesting deal, and I'd be fascinated to know, I guess, how many similar deals have been made, in the modern day with musicians that we might not be aware of. Nuclear Blast agree to put out the Control Denied album when he has a lineup for it. They can also put out a brand new Death album. This band that had literally like a year before he'd broken up, which raises the question of, it's kind of unclear how really in it Chuck was at this point in time when we look at where we're going to go with Death, given that obviously he's not around for us to ask him. It's one of the fascinating things that you would like to ask, a living Chuck Schuldiner. The Sound of Perseverance is where we're going to go next. And it's kind of easy to hear that story and go, oh, it must just be a half-assed, begrudging contractual obligation. Like, he wants to make Control Denied records. He's contractually obligated to make a Death record along with it. Doesn't sound like the Sound of Perseverance is very phoned in, does it?
No. Imagine, if... just the quality of this, that this is your I can't, lads, I'll do it if I have to.
It's your contractual obligation record, and it sounds like what I can imagine a lot of fans would probably consider one of their masterpieces in a lot of ways, silly.
I mean, it is very possible that Chuck always did plan on coming back to Death. Richard Christie says that, it was basically his life's work. He knew how much people, cared about that band and connected to it, and he just needed time to go and do something different. But regardless, in 1998, a new look Death, consisting essentially of the instrumental Control Denied lineup, those four guys, is brought together to make a new album, which becomes The Sound of Perseverance, which is released on August the 31st, 1998, through Nuclear Blast Records, their new partners. And man, Death's progression, where we were talking about the big leap made on Symbolic, you combine that with the kind of Control Denied fiasco, which obviously Control Denied's record eventually comes after this. We'll talk about everything that is made up there after this. But it makes The Sound of Perseverance really stand out on its own as an album yet again. And I think the thing that many people listening will likely have heard The Sound of Perseverance. You, Sam, said it's like the one Death album that you would listen to prior to doing this special, but not everyone might actually know this detail, which is that this is basically originally a Control Denied album. Chuck does deny this in the press at the time, but Bite the Pain, Spirit Crusher, Story to Tell, A Moment of Clarity, and Voice of the Soul have all been stated by the other living members of Control Denied / Death on this album to be originally Control Denied songs that were Death Eyes, is the word they've used. Voice of the Soul apparently initially written during the Symbolic years. Probably both true in terms of like different homes that song found over the years before eventually becoming the version on Sound of Perseverance. And there are in fact demos that you can hear of some of these songs from about 1996 that have clean vocals on them. It's crazy.
Yeah, are they publicly available? I'd not had...
Some of them are. I mean, I was listening to some of them on YouTube earlier, and they might be some of the ones that are on kind of Perseverance relapse reissues and stuff like that. But given all of that, the fact that this was A, not the record that Chuck initially wanted to be making, and B, a good fucking 2/3 of the material is ported over from a record he was writing for another band. Isn't it insane how fucking jaw-droppingly incredible this album turns out to be?
I think it's just Chuck's like dedication to his art, where he can't like I say, even if this is his contractual obligation now, and he's kind of just having to rework songs he's already written, he can't phone it in.
That's a really good point. In fairness, he's like, got come too far to like piss away the Death legacy with just like some half-assed record. He's
not gonna put out something that he is not like for all the things we talked about, all the like insane little like diva moments that Chuck might have had. He seems like he is a perfectionist for a reason, and he's not gonna stop that now. Even if this is an album he wants to be making at this moment, he's not gonna like go cheap on it and make it sound just like, oh, this is the Death record I don't want to do. It's like, it just doesn't strike me as something that he would do, like all the things we've talked about.
No, you're right.
I can also imagine, right, like just being in his shoes, you know, your band is called Death, you're a metal band, there is now a genre called death metal, you're sick of being associated with it, you kind of can't, be torn away from it because you are literally called Death. Like, it would probably piss me off a little bit too, but yeah, like you're saying, it's like, even if he initially maybe didn't want to, again, it would be incredible to like get his take on it like now, like after time had passed, but obviously we can't. But just that, even though this is the one where he's like, yeah, I just have to do this, if no one told you that, you wouldn't know. It sounds different enough from Control Denied. We'll discuss that later when we get onto that record. Not just vocally, but like musically as well. It's different enough to be its own thing and to be like unmistakably Death as well, and pretty much like to the highest of standards.
I mean, Control Denied was clearly him going even further down the prog route. Like, even when we look from where his writing was on the previous Death records, there is a much more intentionally kind of difficult but progressive mindset to writing those kind of songs, because he intended it to be a kind of, insular sort of progressive project rather than be, the thing he'd be going around touring, be like, come on, heavy metal maniacs, you fucking circle pit for me, those kind of records. That's not what he wanted to be doing at this point in time. But so where these songs start life, they have that progressive instinct that was more so focused on Control Denied. But by, I guess, having to port them back into being Death songs, they link up with, the really grandiose melodic extremity that Death were having circa Symbolic. And we should probably count ourselves lucky that like it turned out that way, because the Sound of Perseverance didn't have to sound this way, but through all the fucking hoops you had to jump through or whatever, we get it. And again, I'm going to go out and I'm going to say the biggest thing that I think is different about the Sound of Perseverance than other Death albums when you just put it on is the dynamic range of it is so much wider than anything before. What I said about Symbolic felt like really beginning to write with a kind of album body of work in mind that starts in one place and ends in another, whether it is the process of initially writing this for a more melodically minded project or just getting more into the flow of doing things like that or whatever. But Jesus Christ, do the 8 songs and a cover of The Sound of Perseverance collectively make up this like fucking monument on how to write a dynamic, genuinely progressive extreme metal album. Where if Symbolic is put on a pedestal of, those like grand classic metal albums like we were talking about, I feel like the Sound of Perseverance's peers are more records like Blackwater Park and so on in their kind of breadth. But there's no, without any sang vocals and being still just uber, fist clenched heavy metal the whole time, there isn't really another record that sounds like this.
No, this is like the death record that is just truly epic in every sense. Like down to this like mountain like Reaper thing. It feels grander. It feels like insurmountable in a way that no other death records do. And like I said, like Symbolic felt grand and epic, and this is just kind of like makes that record sound comparatively quite small compared to just the scope of this record. The breadth of the sound and just like what they achieve across it is just monumental.
Yeah, I feel like I'm stood on top of that mountain that's got the teeth like the annoying orange, like alongside Chuck, just like, mate, you've done it. Like you've like again, like you're saying, like he's accomplished so much, and just listening to this album again, it's not like you were talking about Symbolic, maybe that being the kind of like that could have been the cutoff for Death, and that was like the end, and people could still be in, if they've been following it from the beginning. I mean, if you kind of dropped off at this point, then very silly. But just it's still so fucking brutal, even though it's so clean sounding, it's so melodic, like what we've been talking about through most of these 3 parts, like the lead work and stuff is fucking insane. Like it's like it's better than Maiden, like the actual the lead lines and stuff, like just singing those guitar leads they're beautiful. I can't think of a record that actually sounds like this or makes me feel like this, and it's so good that again that Painkiller cover at the end doesn't feel like, oh well, that's the best song because it's Judas Priest. It's just, oh yeah, that's just an extra song in it. Yeah, like
I think you said those guitar leads. There are guitar leads on this. I'm like, oh, that has been stolen by like. There are some riffs in here like that riff's been stolen and used elsewhere, and there's so many of them because they're just untouchable classic, just like huge metal guitar leads that are just unbelievably brilliant.
I want to go back quickly to just the kind of the general aura of majesty that this album has, and how you mentioned the cover, the album presentation really, feeds into that. I may lament the Grim Reaper finally disappearing from the logo, but he is in the mountain, in fairness. Like, it's an austere, serious-looking album. The cover is done by Travis Smith, not Trivium's drummer, but he's since become known as Opeth's go-to art guy, along with, like, Avenged Sevenfold.
Devin
and a bunch
as well.
Else. Yeah, and that kind of gaping maw of the mountainside, surrounded by, a kind of a red fog, being scaled by these tiny little figures, embarking on this huge, daunting climb ahead of them. It feels, profound and like this, metaphysical challenge to the self that this record is trying to be. If you are old enough to remember this album before it was re-released in 2011, you may remember the older cover from the original 90s edition, which is essentially the same image, but done in a slightly more dated CGI, late 90s digital art manner. When Travis returned to give the remastered edition a more timeless painted version of the same cover, essentially, yeah, that's just perfect, isn't it?
Yeah,
I had no idea there was the old cover, and I was like, oh, okay, cool. It is a bit more dated, but it just that re-release version is like one of the most striking metal artworks.
It's such a strong image anyway that I wouldn't have minded the old cover, but then they give it this new literal lick of paint, and it's like, that's become just one of the best ever.
Yeah, like the old one is cool. It looks a bit like a Yu-Gi-Oh card, like the one from 2011. Like, it is classic. Like that, you can see that as like a giant canvas. And at Bloodstock they have the metal gallery or whatever. Like, you
Elleran Kantor's doing a fucking UK exhibition in the Wirral, like not far outside of Liverpool. Really strange place to do it, but I might go. But yeah, related.
Yes, no, but you can see it in like a big like gallery like that, can't you? It's just so fucking grand and like bigger than you. Like, I would love to see that blown up, like, like just massive, like 20-meter high. You
feeling like dwarfed compared to it.
Yeah. Like it'll be a challenge to ascend the whole thing. And the production and the mix on this, like, even though again done by Jim Morris at Morrisound, somehow it makes Symbolic again, which was such a huge leap, seem like flat and thin. It's crazy. And I think this might be about the best you can get an analog metal recording to sound in terms of like clarity and just crispness and pristineness and everything. Like how, like this is just total state of the art crystallization of heavy metal as a challenging, progressive, and emotive art form metal. Like there's not a second of this that isn't immaculate.
It's classy as well in a way that like no other death metal, like no other death album has even felt like. There's been moments that you feel like, but like there is just a level of class and sophistication, and it comes down to like the playing and the production that does just sort of separate this one.
Yeah, and even though we are talking about class, and it is like stately and grand, this big fucking epic, but at the same time, again, we mentioned he covers Painkiller at the end. Something like Bite the Pain, like the midsection that's just like the soloing and everything, that's pure like Painkiller era Priest, just this blood pumping heavy metal that Chuck has always loved, but just done filtered through this weird like hyper clean progressive metal like, mutation.
Everything about this has just been pushed. Like the guitar playing, the vocals, the song structure, the instrumental playing. I think Symbolic is, as we've said a couple times, it's about as far as like some death metal purists would have liked for it to have gone. But this is where that really melodic and beautiful side of Chuck's ambitions as a heavy metal songwriter really like properly, they finally arrive at their like long destined zenith. For those that love it, there is something about the emotive side of this album that just speaks to people in a way rarely if ever achieved by a so-called death metal album. Like it's so fucking stirring, this album.
Yeah, like we always talk about his lyrics, but just musically, like it is, you just feel it. Like even on something like Flesh and the Power It Holds, like when it breaks down into that bass line that sounds just like an old man humming, you know, like how, you know, like you can tell how old someone is depending on if they hum going da 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 or bum bum bum, but it's the latter, and that's what the bass sounds like, and it just makes me feel nostalgic. It makes me feel something that like a bass on a death metal album shouldn't really make me feel, apart from, you know, going.
I mean, that's all over it. Like, Bite the Pain, how warm and kind of sad that intro is, kind of simultaneously. Like, it's really introspective sounding before the rest of it goes apeshit. But really, the kind of the weeping emotion to the melodic approach to this album is the dripping with fucking sorrow and mournfulness elements of Flesh and the Power It Holds. One of the many sections, of one small element of that fucking 8.5 minute longest song of Death's career that you go through. But there are parts of it that sound like it could be like My Dying Bride songs or something. Like it fucking hits me in my chest every time. And those Ascending the Mountain type heavy metal riffs that I've kept waxing lyrical about, all of those have been building to the crystallization of that feeling in death music, which is Spirit Crusher, which is such a dense song, but that opening up moment of the dun 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 dun, and how just like fuck yeah, that is one of the most grandiose pieces of heavy metal ever written that just uses the bass guitar and drums set up. And then you have Chuck howling Spirit Crusher like over it, where he gets the closest like he could have dreamed of on his own material to achieving his kind of Halford dreams. My God, what a fucking thing to behold in every element, that song.
Mate.
Spirit Crusher is just like, it's perfect. Like it is that full on like defiant, emotional, just kind of like people are trying to tear you down and you are not having it, and it feels really fitting for someone like Chuck to kind of get to write this song and have this moment for him.
I also enjoy Spirit Crusher, the vicious kind. Is there another kind of Spirit Crusher other than a vicious one? But yeah, what you're saying about his vocals, I kind of like over the past few albums how he just gets higher and higher pitched, like with each record, and now he's just going, nah, fuck it. Like I like that he's finally
but screaming, like he's not actually. Again,
Yeah.
we're doing that because we can't
Doing the heavy metal,
yeah, but it's just that, like, again, that really just high pitch, like.
Yeah.
There is more of a screech on this record, like with his vocals. It's more piercing.
Yeah,
For sure. I
no,
mean,
it's wonderful.
back in Spirit Crusher again, there's a thing that bands do where kind of halfway through a song, they'll have this kind of like circle pit inciting, really stirring melodic break in a song. I always call it the Imperium riff after the midsection in that song. Really, I should be calling it the Spirit Crusher riff. And it wouldn't be a surprise to learn that Rob Flynn was a fan of this record when writing it. And it's kind of like an upbeat melodic death metal thing in a way that, you know, leads into what we think of like the next 10 years of heavy metal in the mainstream, like really sounding like, and it's there in the middle of fucking Spirit Crusher.
That riff in the middle of Spirit Crusher, it's the opening riff to Unholy Confessions, like
yeah, there you go.
and like Thank You for the Venom, even My Chemical Romance. Yeah. Like it does that riff is the one I was talking about where I'm like, so many bands have copied that riff because it's fucking perfect.
Yeah,
like that riff when it comes in and when they bring it again back in at the end, and just like, that is what like melodic heavy metal guitar playing that should stir something in you should be. And you're right, it is proper like circle pit kind of material at the same time, as well as just being really rousing and just like fist pumping. It's just unbelievable.
That is a really good point. Like Frank Iero 100% listens to Death. Like,
yeah.
Oh, I wouldn't be shocked if like
the entire band do, and it's the same for fucking Avenged, isn't it? But yeah, like that, just the straight up. The other thing I love about bands like At the Gates and stuff that obviously go on to then inspire your Triviums and Avenged and so on as well is that kind of classic heavy metal but pumped up to modern day standards of aggression and extremity and stuff like that. And this record just fucking has it. There's those like dun 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 dun, dun kind of like running with the devil parts of Story to Tell or something with the lead guitars. Like they dance around and add as much flavor and character as like on any Iron Maiden song, but then they'll crunch together for that fucking double bass tight picking part. It is a fascinating question to me, who is someone on the side of like absolutely loving this album. What makes it so special when it is coming out of being a Control Denied record? And I think there's a personal sweet spot of taking the intended kind of melodic approach, more so, that we're going to get when we talk about Control Denied, but playing into Chuck's wheelhouse here the most of kind of the songwriting style of guitars being the real amount of focus, the vocal hooks less melodic, more vicious, and in general hitting the sweet spot of like ramping up the extremity and the physicality of what these songs maybe initially were, as well as making them sound so pristine as they sound this album. Like, it doesn't lose the extremity by doing that, and it is a bit of a fucking, thank God situation that things went as they did and they ended up being death songs, because they are all the better for them, and it's a bit of a win-win situation that we get like a pretty cool Control Denied album for the people who really want that, and this massive progressive statement of a death album.
I think it's that sweet spot, because I feel quite differently about the Control Denied album and this one, where
sure, yeah,
this just
many people do before we go into
and
that,
like
just to make you aware.
the thing is like musically, yeah, I think there's a lot in common with the two records, but just this one kind of like adding, like roughing up those edges just a little bit, having Chuck scream, but having like, and so because like again, I'm not like the prog person, like, but like this is like what I would want progressive music to sound like, because it is still exciting, it is still driving and like inspiring and heavy and fun and just like uplifting and full of like the whole Sound of Perseverance thing. It is like motivational and like really like empowering, but it's just intricate, well crafted. It again, it's one of those albums that just juggles so much and does it all really well.
Yeah, just like Hatebreed, mate. Yeah.
There is something wonderful about the fact that this record is called The Sound of Perseverance.
Yeah,
and it feels like,
but it has that similar kind of like rousing spirit.
Yeah, but
just done in a totally different way.
It's like, obviously it's the end of the career, not that it was known to them at this point, but like it is a number of albums in, and it feels like they've struggled and strived, and then they unlock what this is, and it is literally the Sound of Perseverance.
Story to Tell has like the perfect feeling for that for me. Like Dark Skies beating me down. Like
yeah, and again, this is the most kind of we've been kind of bandying the word epic around, but it's very personal in places like that lyric that you just mentioned, like that Dark Skies beating me down with the shadows. Yeah, I'm so glad that this wasn't a Control Denied album, because I think, again, there are lots of differences between this and Control Denied, but I think it is just that thing of like, he knows what he needs to do to make a death album, as in like he had those Control Denied songs, which, everyone basically who's surviving has said, yeah, they were Control Denied songs. And obviously they've gone through this kind of like meat grinder to
Yeah.
make them death songs. And I'm just so glad that they are, because maybe that's what makes it just such a fucking joy, that they were written in a different way for a different purpose, and then they've been kind of like reconfigured.
I think intellectually they are quite similar albums when you look at them on a kind of compositional level and stuff like that, the style of guitar playing and all of that. But emotionally and viscerally, the feeling when you listen to it,
it's so different.
There is, and that is what makes, you know, the Sound of Perseverance kind of stand out in the way it does. And when you say put it through that meat grinder, you're talking about upping the brutality of it. That fucking Bite the Pain, palm muting gallop riff, the is fucking insane. Like, any band comes out with that now, whether they are a tech death band or whether they are Lamb of God or like Modern Employed to Serve or whatever, like a straight up metal band, Bleed From Within, fucking hell. But would they be able to encase that in like such nimble and dexterous arrangements that this has, and has, you know, fucking melodically voiced bass parts that have like a really important part around it? Probably not. I love the thing that they, you know, started doing, something like the opening riff of Secret Face from Human, that stop-start thing. Here, they have gotten so heavy and so hard with that snare sound, that razor-sharp guitar, none more so than the intro of A Moment of Clarity, which makes that like so catchy and almost fun. And it's like, you know, that taking those pointers from like Justice era Metallica and stuff like that, but they've reached, you know, 10 years after that record here, such a fucking just like brutalistic but equally flowery and kind of fleshed out point. When you look at the unit on this lineup, like, it's not the biggest death lineup for names by any means. Shannon Hamm is obviously fucking incredible to be the guy like trading solos with Chuck on this record, and, you know, have all of these massive extended back and forth solo sections and stuff like that. Scott Clendenin is allowed to pop a little bit more than Kelly Conlon was on Symbolic, like just really solid progressive metal playing. You're not going to talk about the Sound of Perseverance very long without getting to Richard Christie, who, unlike Gene Hoglan, does not have a really long line of like classic metal records behind him, but can only be described as a fucking revelation on this album. Where did you get this guy?
You're following Gene Hoglan, and you're still like that's the biggest kind of bar to reach on this one, and he's still doing like just as many things where you're gonna go like, how does Chuck find these people?
It almost, again, like what I was saying about Gene kind of listening to Human and going, like the start of Scavenger of Human Sorrow, that drum fill and the fucking China, it's just going, fuck off, Gene. Like, it's properly like just, you know, laying it out there. And there are so many fucking mental fills across this record. Like, this guy is, again, like Gene Hoglan is one of my favourite drummers ever, but like to follow him and not sound embarrassing, to sound like pretty much as good as that guy, it's incredible, isn't it?
I mean, there's a trope that I am fond of in the annals of heavy metal history, where a new drummer joins a band, and the album that they're on, they introduce themselves with an insane, cool as fuck fill. Where Equals Dare by Iron Maiden has Nico McBrain doing it. Painkiller, obviously, appropriately, has Scott Travis doing it. And the Scavenger of Human Sorrow one is the most insane one ever, I think. It takes the piss. It's ingrained in my head. Like, it's so much more complicated than the Painkiller one, for example. But each little wild splash cymbal, and then that mental guitar flourish that you get when they crash together. And when they crash together, you realise that opening fill wasn't actually just kind of a show-off fill. It's literally the beat of the first riff of the song. Like, what? The fact that I can say, this is my favourite drum performance on a Death album, including what I just said is Gene Hoglan's best ever performance, and before that we have like one of my favourite drummers ever in Sean Reiner. Considering Richard Christie has played on like far, far fewer essential metal recordings than those two, even the likes of like Chris Reifert and Bill Andrews earlier on, like considering their resumes, this is just one of those insane magic moments.
Yeah, I mean, you get that fill at the start of Scavenger, but then like a minute in, there's that part where the bass, the drums, and the guitar are all doing their own thing and could be the lead instrument in their own right. And it is, like we were saying with Gene, where like, just listen to that bit. I think it's about a minute in. It's fucking mental. Like, that's 3 different songs going off at once. And just, again, this new, like, what a way to introduce this new band.
I think the way that you said that the instruments all dance around each other at that point and do sound like different songs playing, but they all come together. It's just like, it's just showing that, like, even if it isn't like the classic Death unit, they are still every bit as worthy of the mantle. There's a bit in like Bite the Pain where it's on the try to come up the Trail of Deceit part of the drumming on that bit where it just goes like full on as well. Like, there's just so many cool moments on the drumming because Rocket's gonna go like, this dude's insane.
Yeah, I mean, my absolute favourite drummers are often people like Brand Daler or Ben Collar, who feel like they are just like on this constant flowing wild train of thought, and they are picking up momentum like a snowball. And that's unlike Gene Hoglan, who has that really cold precision. That's what Richard Christie feels like on this. Like, he's just going and he elevates every idea that is thrown at him by Chuck's writing. It's like, here's every mental riff. Find something to do here, and he will find something that is just fascinating to listen to. And then you add on to that the fact that in the production, this is purely one of the best drum kit sounds on a metal album ever too. Again, the snare and the fucking cymbal hits just like cut right through you. It's a truly out of this world Hall of Fame performance from a guy who, like, honestly, I don't care an awful lot about like much of anything else he's ever played on, but this one moment where he turns up and goes, I'm gonna do arguably the greatest metal drumming performance of all time, like, fucking hell.
Imagine the like massive grin he had on his face in Bite the Pain with the one cannot ching 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 assume like into that thrash bit. Like, it's so hard.
Yeah, and the way, again, the sounds of his kit just like absolutely fly out of the speakers at you. Piercing is the word for this album in general. Even the guitars are like shrill and screaming, but you also have Chuck, again, stepping up to deliver personally one of my favourite vocal sounds just on an extreme metal record. He's blistering on this in a way that he hadn't been before, and he was very open, again, about the fact that part of the whole Control Denied Desire was the fact that death metal vocals were beginning to put a real strain on his voice, and he wasn't really enjoying doing that anymore, which is novel to think about when we cast our minds right back to the very start of this special when we were talking about Chuck and Cam Lee butting heads over who was going to be the singer in Mantas. But like, that does go to explain partially why he like gradually moved out of a more guttural range into finding these kind of higher registers. I don't know if this was like more or less uncomfortable for him in the long term, but his voice goes up like a whole fucking octave or something, if you can sensibly say that about screams. But, you know, over the course of that process, and here it's just like so bug-eyed and intense. And the way he comes in on Scavenger Human Sorrow with the what pain will it take? Like, it's so full on. And there's a part in Flesh and the Power It Holds where the music drops out and he just has that, told you once, and just fucking, it all kicks off with him. He might not have enjoyed doing it anymore, but he's able, when we spoke about being expressive on Symbolic, like here, he's put so much feeling into it once he's reached this kind of higher, more legible registers, and it's one of the most expressive sounding death metal screams on sound you will ever hear, but it has so many just fucking sick as fuck moments that get in your head.
It's definitely one of the more extreme elements of this record. I think it's totally fitting that when he's doing this vocal performance, this is where we get a Painkiller cover, because you like, of course, it's so perfectly tuned for that kind of song. At the same time, that just really shrill, piercing, like shriek. But it is one of the things that makes this album sound as heavy and extreme as it does, is Chuck's vocals. Yeah,
because it sounds like he is trying to do his own Halford or his own Udo or his own Dickinson, but he can't because he's a death metal vocalist, so this is how he does it. And the result is, like you say, it's so expressive and shrill and quite extreme still. But there's so many hooks, man. Like that.
Big words, small mind. Behind the pen, you'll find a scavenger. Of human sorrow.
It's that, and it's that I told you once bit,
Yeah.
but I'll say it again. Like, it's so big.
Yeah, with these, like, again, really well written, insightful lyrics, where his kind of more sophisticated style of writing has like reached such a strong spot on this, while also continuing what we were saying about Symbolic, where that emotional expression of the guitar, they work really well. There's a part in A Story to Tell where Chuck just goes, "Tell it!" before a fucking 3-minute, like, melodically dynamic instrumental passage does all of the talking for him. Like, it's just wonderful in that sense. On that kind of idea, Voice of the Soul, which, as I alluded to earlier, is massive. Like, it's become Def's most well-known track over the years, despite being an instrumental, and is sort of become revered and has held up this... It's kind of held up as, like, this perfect example of everything that is emotional and true about heavy metal guitar playing.
Is it on something? Like, why is it it's like with Nick Cave. I wonder why "Oh Children" was the most played.
I don't know, but
fucking Harry Potter.
But I think you just see people. Again, I might have missed something. I didn't come across anything in my research.
No, I couldn't find anything.
But just like, it's just a absolutely adored song. People think it's the most like beautiful thing they've ever heard.
Like, to be fair, for a 3-minute like instrumental, it's
amazing.
so emotional.
Yeah, it deserves it.
It is so there's such a warmth to it that like you don't necessarily get from other Def things, but it feels like, I say, like, right down to speak Voice of the Soul. Like, the message is clear from the song title, and just the sound of it, and those like the grandeur and like the use of acoustic guitar, and like when you get the melodic moments of playing, like with the real technicality. I'm sure it's something that maybe like Def purists probably would have turned their nose up at the time, but I mean, it's such a crucial part of like the journey of this record.
Yeah, well, I mean that like the little doodly-doo, like such a memorable sticky little guitar riff. That reminds me of what Iron Maiden, like after this fucking record, like 20 years after this, would turn into like a 13-minute song that repeats its sections too many times. But that alone on here, like just as a start, conjures such an atmosphere. That classical guitar element that they flirted with briefly on Symbolic, getting a full moment to shine, and it just becomes, you know, one of the most expressive, starkly momentous instrumental tracks to ever feature on a metal record. And it's emblematic of something about Chuck in general, but particularly I think this record, given how overblown and pompous this record in particular could be. But the playing and the writing is just so tasteful.
Yeah, that's the thing in it. It's like so many records like this, you got like a 3-minute interlude or something. It's like, I can just skip that. You're not
doesn't add
skipping
anything, does it? Yeah.
Yeah, you're not skipping Voice of the Soul, are you? And it says so much that, again, the band Death, who basically created death metal, they have this catalogue of basically wall-to-wall classics. This is the most played song. I think that says so much about Chuck and his writing and his reach, and just the scope of his songwriting, that this is the one that has resonated with people, because it is fucking beautiful as well. Like,
yeah, and even with how tasteful, again, use that word for this record, still capable of being wild. That out of nowhere tapping part that sends the final 30 seconds of To Forgive Is to Suffer just like totally haywire before the song starts phasing in and out. But everything has got place and purpose and is meant as an emotional extension of himself. And with that in mind, you get the really bizarro end of this album. That lead that opens Flesher and the Power It Holds is like as fucking Twilight Zone you could make a death riff sound. Like, it's so strange and alien. And I mentioned that song earlier as containing probably the saddest, most human sounding passages of Def's career. It also has the most freaky, and it also has like the tightest fucking actual breakdowns, which are pure stink face.
Yeah, that's when we're like the prog stuff really goes all out, like in the middle bit, and it just gets, it is like kind of like them having like not like full on prog figure, but it's them like dipping out into that. But when they want to put it back in and just go stink face riff, they do it with such ease. Like,
yeah. It feels like just like every lead guitar on this is harmonized with about 12 other lead guitars. It's like the Chuck Schuldiner lead approach dialed up to the most insane level. Spindly, eccentric little hooky riffs. That To Forgive Is to Suffer riff, you've got Richard Christie in full extreme metal thunder, but instead of going for like a really blistering, death metal riff like they had with Bite the Pain earlier. You get this really strange, like, spidery little guitar idea that's so catchy, but such a cool contrast to the rhythm section, before then the mother of all fucking heavy riffs hits just after that minute mark, and you can imagine the whole band in just, like, full body headbang mode. It's just rammed with breathtaking moments like that. It does end on a cover of Judas Priest's Painkiller, which, for a start, hearing that drum fill on a kit that sounds like as crisp and organic as this one, instead of the Painkiller sound, which is like full insane Metal Machine reverb, like all of the different cymbal sounds that Christie has on his kit for this album, super cool when you apply that to fucking Painkiller. But often mentioned among the best covers of all time when we have this discussion among the audience. It's a real favourite that pops up time and time again. There are also people out there who count it as like not one of their favourite moments from Chuck's career in general, but I love it. I think it goes hard.
I mean, it's a nice moment when the record on. It's fun. Like, it doesn't reinvent the song. It just kind of like plays Painkiller, but a bit more extreme. Why wouldn't you love that?
I think this might have been the first Death song I heard, actually, like, come to think of it. But yeah, it is. It's like, it's fairly faithful to the original. Like, you know, the solos are reimagined, and like it's a bit more mental, and like vocally he is a bit gruffer than Halford, obviously, but he's not grunting. And you know, he does venture into those cleans right at the end, and that last vocal note, which is just hilariously over the top and goes on for way too long, and I love it. If Death went on to just do songs like this, like they'd still be one of the best bands ever.
I'd be just having a great time of just like turbocharged. 'Cause that's what this is. It's, you know, it's playing it straight enough to maintain everything that's great about the original, but just sharpening those edges and making it more extreme and visceral. You're right to say that the moment where they do put their real own flair on it, when it is the solo sections, the the exact solos from the original song are some of the best heavy metal solos ever, and so catchy and memorable. They are really famous. Instead, they do a kind of more free-form thing that fits the vibe, and they in turn come up with their own really fucking incredible, catchy, memorable solos for the song Painkiller. But you're right, Chuck's voice on this just lifts. This feels like the kind of butterfly coming out of the cocoon moment for him, where he's still screaming, but it's so pitched, and it's so able to carry the nuance of melody, which is just batshit. And as you say, it is the only moment at the end of it where a Death song sees Chuck sing just a little bit cleanly for a few lines right at the end of basically their final record. The genre question that we had about Symbolic holds a little more of an interesting weight to it here, because this was supposed to be a Control Denied record, and as we'll get onto in a minute, the instrumental approach of Control Denied is quite similar in a number of ways. And while I think if you poll the general people, again, this would come out very high for all of the reasons we are talking about, this is the only Death record, I think, where certain areas of the audience seem to outright dislike it. And there is this kind of attitude of, like, it's not really a Death record, it's a Control Denied record. They got forced into being a Death record, and it's riff salad with no coherent song structures, and Chuck's high-pitched voice even is described as sounding a bit whiny. I think compared to Symbolic, that goes far enough for people. Like, the Phase 1 and even Phase 2 Death fanatics sometimes find this record goes beyond the pale and loses sight of the death metal sensation that they fell in love with. I'm just putting that out there because if you ever see this record being sneered at and feel totally shocked, as I did the first time I saw those takes, that is an opinion that's held out there.
I mean, I get it, because there's a particular brand of death metal fan who likes their death metal a certain way. So I can imagine, particularly if at the time, if you've been following Death from the beginning and this is where they end up, you might feel a bit like, oh, it's not proper Death.
I think there are also people who maybe on the other side of that sort of see this as a bit of a hodgepodge, where like they would rather it would have been perhaps a Control Denied record. Possibly,
yeah. I mean, for me, I can't imagine that. Like, I think this,
yeah.
I think it's that combination of like the extremity and the progressive tendencies, and the way they combine together so excellently is what makes this record just wonderful. But I can understand that why some people might prefer a more prog album that's not like as extreme.
Some of the reactions, though, like the are kind of incited by this, it's like someone's heard like the first couple of Opeth albums and then heard Heritage. Like, it's not that much of a leap. Like, I get it. Like, it does sound different and stuff, and it's not like strictly death metal, but it's still, you can see where they've gone from Symbolic to this. Like, it's not that much of a leap, really, is it?
Yeah, I think there is a brand of person, or I should say, just a group of people out there, I should say, that don't like the kind of death control denied hybridization that you have on the Sound of Perseverance, and that will be a kind of make or break thing for you. For me, that kind of is what helps make it an absolute one of a kind, nothing ever like it record, where this is a death metal record, but it is as much a power metal record as it is, as much a purely progressive metal record. And I think that, that's kind of what makes it, even if he did initially want to be making another album at the time. You said earlier, Alex, something that kind of stuck with me just in my brain for the last 40 minutes or whatever, when you said, like, oh, Chuck, you've done it. You've reached that mountain. And he kind of wanted to be doing something different in order to get there. But, like, Chuck's vision of an all-round metal art form that was expressive and dynamic and heavy and everything like that, it's all here. And given how emotionally, aching it is as well, and how, kind of spiritually in tune with him it is, I think it arguably makes up Chuck's definitive statement as an artist in terms of, like, everything he'd wanted to say with his music up to this point, what he wanted metal to be, outside of having clean vocal melodies, which this record doesn't need. This record does it.
It's the record he wanted to make in terms of its progression and emotional stuff, but it has the extremity of what Chuck brought to metal, basically. And so when you add those two things together, it does just feel like everything that could represent Chuck as a songwriter is here.
It's kind of like what we've been saying through a lot of the records, that as he progresses, it's like, oh, it's, this jazz leaning thing, but done by a death metal musician, and oh, it's like heavy metal, but done by a death metal musician. And this is, it's that like proggy power metal, heavy metal thing, but it's Chuck doing it, who, created death metal, and he has all of this, like, just this knowledge. And like, he's written the rule book pretty much, so just him applying that to what he wants to do next, with, like, he wants to get more proggy and he wants to do Control Denied. When he's doing that, but through that unique death lens, I already said it, but it's like, there's nothing else that sounds like this. It's fucking spellbinding. Like, every time I listen to this, like, I just smile. Like, there's so much just incredible songwriting on this, and like the leads, and like just that fucking insane drumming performance, and just listening along to Chuck's just like one of a kind vocal patterns. It's one of the best metal records.
Yeah,
ever.
And that style of kind of progressive classic metal that Chuck was in love with at that point. When you say it's him, that done by Chuck, I'm being flippant here because I do like a fair bit of that stuff. But this record to me is like, don't need Dream Theater, like
no,
this, like
no
this
one needs fucking Dream Theater, mate. But
I mean, images and words, fucking rules. But this is a progressive record. But this record gives me that sensation on like such a visceral level at the same time.
It's exciting in the way prog isn't to me.
Sure. And I think Control Denied is perhaps more like trying to do that and like add something of his own to that style that was already a thing. Whereas the Sound of Perseverance just sounds like absolutely stands on its own for all time as a staggering achievement. It does take a long, long time to really get to grip with these compositions, like all of the individual ideas that make up songs like A Moment of Clarity and Story to Tell and Flesh and the Power It Holds, and how those all work together in these like enormous labyrinthine songs that are easily the most complex, multiple moving part songs Death ever made. Like, this does need the most active listening and the most dedication to really get inside as someone going with the songs on the record. But when you do that, every one of these 8 original songs is fucking transformative, and it's such a technical, dense album. But it's not just, a show of skill. It's really long and really attention demanding, but above all else, it's driven by self-expression and the desire to make art, and as a result it carries this real fucking aura about it of, almost like prestige kind of expressiveness. Like even the wording, flesh and the power it holds, voice of the soul, you know what I mean, what we were saying about that cover art. And I think where it did leave some old school fans behind, to the generations to have discovered Death's music after the fact, I think it holds even more of a place of reverence, because if you find out about this band and how they were kind of cut short before your time of being into music, and you go to the last thing they did, Jesus Christ, where do you start with fucking this? And like I said, Voice of the Soul has kind of taken on this life on its own. Songs from this album do make up 5 of their top 10 songs on streaming platforms and stuff like that, and it's not fucking aged like at all. I think something worth noting is that this and Symbolic, they never got on board the train of using like heavy electronics or anything like that in that kind of late 90s landscape. Instead, it's just all focused on being organic and natural, intentionally so. But like, this record has not aged a day.
I think it's because, like I say, it sounds grand, it sounds epic, produced incredibly, but it's not impenetrable. And I mean that's just an important thing of how it can like sound timeless as a result, where it is still song focused, it's still catchy, but it just sounds like the peak of all the different aspects, and that to me just gives it just that real like untouchable timeless edge.
I think that song focus thing is so important with because we've said it before with some of the other albums like Human.
We said it
and
right
stuff.
from the start, like in Scream Bloody Gore.
Yeah, like it is that thing of like he wants to write tunes, and it's the same thing here. Like that mindset is the same. It's just the tools he's using are very different.
He's wanting to write more expansive songs and like more like intricate journeys, but they are still like they're not just shoving in a 5-minute guitar solo into the middle of a song to be like, look at how impressive we can play. Everything is still serving the exact right purpose it needs to.
Yeah, still bangers.
Yeah, and parts of it just crunch so fucking hard that I just want to like clench my fist and grit my teeth. Like I said, you can feel its influence on like, Trivium and kind of the mainstream metal of like the following years as much as you can anything progressive. It just feels like Death at their most magnificent in the true sense of that word. Like Death have about 4 albums that you could call their masterpiece, but if I'm going to call any of them the true 10 out of 10 one, I personally would give it to this one, even though there are people out there who say it's comfortably the worst thing they ever did. It just feels like one of those absolute like, this is a zenith of this style of music. Like, how can you really go much further than this kind of record? Like, nearly 25 years on, it still sounds like almost an end point for heavy metal as a whole. Like, it's insane. Like, even when you look at records that have come since, like The Blackening, like Shogun, like Leviathan.
Those are records that you just don't get without this, isn't it? Like,
well, I mean, again, like Leviathan, Shogun, whatever. Records I think are all masterpieces, to be clear. Do they really do that much that The Sound of Perseverance didn't do? It's debatable. Again, I'm being flippant. Leviathan's about Moby Dick, but like the DNA, how far it goes. This
I'm
does it.
with you. I think this album sets the blueprint for every time one of the big modern metal bands decides they want to do their kind of prog influence epic album, like The Blackening, like Shogun. This sets the kind of like the template for that record.
Last time then, what's the best song on this Death album?
I mean, it's Spirit Crusher, innit? Like this whole album is like next level brilliant, but Spirit Crusher is one of the best songs. It has a shout to be the best song of Death's career, if you ask me. Like,
I mean, yeah, like this is a tough one for me because Flesh and the Power It Holds is like Spirit Crusher would be the best song on any other Death album easily, and it's a transcendent heavy metal track. But the standard of this record, again, Flesh and the Power It Holds, is so gargantuan. So many people would even, pit for the fucking 3-minute classical style instrumental. I am going with my first love, which is the feeling of pressing play on this album and being hit by Scavenger of Human Sorrow. Mate.
That's the one. Like, just the way that kicks the album off. Like what I said about just that feeling of joy, you get that as soon as that fill comes in, and it doesn't let you go.
it also has, like, past that fill, it has that kind of symbolic title track effect of the way it builds into like a whirlwind circle pit riff, but it's over a course of like a couple minutes at the start of this song, where those couple minutes are filled with, like you were saying earlier, so much insane shit, so many ideas that unbelievably come together to form like a pretty even flow of the song. But then that dam breaks with even more sense of circumstance with it, because it's not as sudden. You have the cymbal accents and everything, and that little just fucking digga-da-da as that goes. That moment, I am in awe of it. Like, there's a part in the middle of that song as well where it all breaks down, and it sounds like the band are playing backwards or something mental, and like it's able to no trouble at all just go from there to crunch into that like swinging metal as fuck solo section. It's gloriously weird but viscerally exciting songwriting, which is what I would describe The Sound of Perseverance as.
Yeah, no, it just perfectly it kind of explores that dichotomy of like primal lizard brain chug and like just that super accomplished, effortless, virtuo like just skill. Scavenger is probably the best Death song. Like it's mind blowing.
Yeah, and every song on this, to be clear, could be someone's favorite. It's fucking top draw shit the whole way. When it arrives, obviously this is 1998. If we spoke about death metal, not really a thing in terms of where people, are thinking, at least not in a traditional sense. In 1998, it's been buried under the weight of the kind of late 90s metal landscape. So Perseverance, in terms of the mainstream, doesn't really make much of a dent at the time. But death coming back to such demand does still make a huge talking point in the extreme scene, where again, if you are someone who has been left behind by nu metal and so on, and what the new popular forms of metal are, if you're just a classic metal nerd, but you are still up for advancement and extreme elements and stuff like that, fuck me, has this record got you covered? You know what I mean? Like, this record is really valued by a lot of people for kind of arriving at the time that it did and offering what it did. This lineup plays their third ever show together, co-headlining the Dynamo Festival in the Netherlands with fucking Pantera. I say about not making a dent in the mainstream, but Death are still, in Europe at least, such a big deal. They go with Pantera to co-headline the festival to 25,000 people, which is a bit of a kind of a Nine Inch Nails at Woodstock situation, where Richard Christie has said it was not the best show by any means because it was so early on in their playing
this
together.
Lineups,
and the shows get better later in the run when it had more time to rehearse, such as you can see the also quite famous Live in LA performance from this run. But for Death shows, this one is pretty iconic for its size. Have you guys seen this? It's on YouTube.
Yeah,
I've seen like little bits of it. I've not had a chance to watch the whole thing properly,
but
the whole clips properly. But yeah,
just looks fucking insane, doesn't it? 25,000 people watching this band crank out Flesh and the Power It Holds.
Yeah, it's just a cool moment of this band got what they deserved.
And finishing on Pull the Plug, Jesus.
Yeah,
it's another one of those things as well. Like, we'll talk about it probably a bit later when we talk about Chuck, but it's just that kind of unassuming nature that he had on stage. Like, watching him at that Dynamo show, he looks like he's having a good time and stuff, but he doesn't really look like a rock star. He looks like he's just a guy playing these songs that he loves. And
then you remember the three other members of this band are basically nobodies in the kind of terms of their big name in the kind of shows they would have played. Fucking wild. For the US run of the Sound of Perseverance tour, he's back at it again. Chuck handpicks the Swedish power metal band Hammerfall to open the run. May I remind you, this is the year that fucking Follow the Leader comes out. How uncool would this move have been? But it's classic Chuck behaviour. When he's talking in the press and stuff at this time, he does seem to be carrying out a one-man mission to kind of say fuck nu metal and keep old school metal alive in America.
Yeah, well, on that Live in LA recording, he's saying to the crowd, he's yeah, real metal's not dead because you're all here, aren't you?
He does. He says something good to see the metal scene still alive in California. Yeah.